I'm reporter Sarah Thamer, and I'm in Moorhead right now for North Star Journey Live, an NPR News live event series that highlights diverse communities around Minnesota. As you might hear, I'm surrounded by students sharing a meal right now. I can smell it, and it smells fantastic. Because we're at the International Food Festival to talk about inclusion. As Minnesota becomes more diverse, many communities are working hard to help newcomers feel a sense of belonging. There are some exciting things happening in the Fargo-Moorhead that demonstrate exactly just that. So let me introduce you first to our set of panelists. Peter Schott is the founder of the Fargo-Moorhead International Potluck, one of the organizations responsible for tonight's dinner. Hi, Peter.
Hi.
Next to Peter is Fauzia Adi. Fauzia is the executive director for the Immigrant Development Center, which she started 20 years ago precisely because she saw how difficult it was for her as a Somali immigrant to connect with the broader Fargo-Moorhead area. I cannot wait to hear what you have to share with us, Fauzia.
Yes.
And on the end, we have Zoe Absey, who works with the New American Consortium in Fargo, which, as the name implies, connects newcomers with employment, housing, and other assistance. Welcome, Zoe.
Thank you.
So, Peter, I want to start with you. Take me back to the beginning. What inspired you to start the Fargo-Moorhead International Potluck? Tell me a little bit about that.
So the journey to where we're sitting right now here in this room today in 2024 started back 20-some years ago when I was a student on campus here. And I did a semester abroad in Malta and was able to experience a number of different cultures. And it was my first time really being out of this area where I was born and raised. And it just ignited this curiosity for me about other cultures. And when we traveled to different places, I was always curious about the food. And so fast forward to about 9 years ago, moved back to the area, wanted to get involved with different communities here. And I thought, let's have a one-time event where we get people together around food, because for me, food has always been something very interesting where you can learn a lot about a culture and a people by the types of food they eat.
Very true.
There's a thing that unites us with food where we all eat, but there's also ways to celebrate diversity in that, where why do some cultures eat spicy food, why do others not, and what are the main dishes and why. So it's a way to really just to learn. So I thought when I came back, let's have an event where we get people together with a Midwest-style potluck with an international flair, where people bring food, something that's important to them. If you think of the movie Ratatouille, where he has that light bulb moment where he tries that food and it brings it back to his mom's kitchen, we all have a story or some emotional connection to a dish. And I said, let's do an event where people bring that dish for them. And so we did that, and it ended up becoming just something where we would meet once a month and build partnerships in the community like the New American Consortium. And we've been doing this for 8 years now.
You just had mentioned something. You really believe that food is a gateway into culture. And I want to hear a little bit more about that. Why do you believe that is? What have you learned through all of this?
I think of so many different experiences, whether it's eating at some hole-in-the-wall restaurant in Tunisia or stopping at somebody's house when I lived in the Dominican Republic, where just like even rice, for example, how people celebrate rice in different cultures. And me growing up in the Midwest, I did not have a proper appreciation for rice, but having been to African countries, having lived in the Dominican Republic, friends that are Haitian, they take pride in their rice and the flavors to it, and you can just celebrate, well, here's one simple grain that's used in so many different exciting ways.
Fauzia, I really want to bring you in here too. I believe you started the Immigrant Development Center partly because you heard newcomers to the Fargo-Moorhead area missed familiar foods. Is that right?
Yes, and also, when we came over this area in 1997 and 1996, the New Americans were coming here through Lutheran Social Services. We didn't have spaces where we can find our spices, our food, and so that's what led me to work on the Immigrant Development Center, where we worked on placemaking and getting the first international market plaza in Fargo-Moorhead.
Wow, that's exciting. So what other things do you see immigrants in the Fargo-Moorhead need? What do they need here?
Well, sense of belonging, where they can find a place where they can find their abayas, their hijabs, where they can find their spices, the clothing, African clothing, where they can get their haircut, get their henna done, so that they don't have to travel long ways to get those services.
I know from experience when you live in the diaspora, it can be hard. And so having that sense of community, that connection to community is such a big deal for people. And so you also work with new Americans in the Fargo-Moorhead area. Tell me what you do in your various roles, because I know you do a lot. I think some listeners might be surprised to learn just how diverse this area is becoming. I mean, I'm surrounded by so many flags, and I can't help but think of how many more have been added just in the last few years, right?
Yeah, so my capacity tonight is as a board member for the New American Consortium. And so we really are about building the bonds between people and building bridges between communities, and celebrating the diversity of the Fargo-Moorhead area through community programming at our event space or our community space, all the way to being part of the International Potluck and making sure we're out in the community, sharing the stories of our community.
So connecting people with services is one thing, but belonging, we know, is so much more than that. So how do you know when people truly feel like they're a part of their community?
I think it shows up in a lot of different ways. They're coming to our events not for services, but really to connect with the community that's coming there that night. We host get-togethers where we have sambusas and we have coloring sheets, and we maybe make Christmas cookies or holiday coloring sheets, and they come because they want their kids to just hang out with other kids, and the moms want to sit together and talk about their day or just be surrounded by others. Another way to show that is also through representation, through folks running for local government, really showing their community and young folks that they belong here and they can also run and be part of this community and make changes.
Fawzia, I wanted to ask you the same question. How do you know when it's working? How can you tell when people really feel like they're a part of something, a part of a community?
Well, when you have community roots, meaning, when we have elected officials who are new Americans, when we have businesses that's owned by new Americans, so this is where it will make you like, ooh, this is home. Rather than traveling long ways to get spice only. When we first came in Fargo-Moorhead, we had to go buy our spices from Minneapolis or Chicago, long ways. Even our halal food, kosher food, we had to travel. But right now, we belong here. We have halal markets, we have multicultural malls that you can get what you need. We feel sense of belonging, but we have a lot of long ways to go too. We have to work on leadership and making sure our youth have all the tools they need to become their own leaders.
Fawzia, when you and I were chatting earlier, you had mentioned to me how long you've been in this area and you raised all of your children here. And you said you don't plan to move, which makes me think that you feel really excited about the future of Moorhead. What excites you? What do you think about when you think of the future?
What excites me, I'm a woman who wakes up with a lot of energy in the morning.
It's true.
I'm working on a cultural mall right now, but what excites me in the future of my children and how they will be part of this community, what excites me in how the community, we assimilated, we are assimilating, we are getting there. People notice, they go to eat in restaurants. We have a lot of different multicultural restaurants that they eat spicy food. It's amazing to watch that. And before, they couldn't touch or test, But the way now our children went to school and they made friends, and now the friends are testing sambusas and bhajias. So we are feeling we are part of this community now because, yes, we had Somalian Heritage Day We had also African Festival Day in downtown where we celebrated, we sing, we danced, we share all our culture. And I'm looking forward to more of those things happening. Also today, what happened here in the food festival is to share our culture and to show we are here. And our students who are going to Concordia, by the way, I heard this year a lot of students registered. So I'm happy for our students in Concordia.
It really is the neat thing about being here tonight is you feel like you get to travel to so many different countries without having to leave. It's wonderful. Food can do that. And so, Peter, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that because one of the things that's interesting about the International Potluck is how you've connected with indigenous groups in the area. Compared to them, we're all new Americans, right?
Exactly. And so early on when we started doing the events, I thought it was really important to establish solid community partnerships with groups that are represented and comprised of different ethnic and cultural backgrounds because you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And so the only way you can learn that is to bring other perspectives into the events and invite them into co-creating them with them. Like, for example, Fauzia and I did a Ramadan event earlier this year, and we did that at the Indigenous Association, where that group has become a partner of ours through the relationship we'd had with the Plains Art Museum. They had just a shared vision for community space. But I think being able to have all those different cultures represented, and when we first came up with the name International Potluck, to me that meant between or among nations, and a lot of people when they would say international it would be kind of a us and them sort of a thing, right? So when we can have the indigenous cultures represented, not only represented in the events, but also a part of the planning and creation and the shaping of them, it just plays such an important role in what we're trying to do.
Togetherness feels like the key word here, right? As everybody's together experiencing these wonderful kinds of foods and kind of an opportunity to learn about culture too, because we know in Minnesota we're not always comfortable talking about race. And so this is sort of a great opportunity to be able to ask somebody about their culture and learn a little bit more about each other. So I wanted to ask you, do you have advice to anyone who wants to start something similar in their own town or neighborhood? What advice do you have?
I would say start somewhere. Don't worry about it being too big. Just invite some people that you know. Think about who are the groups or people in your community that not only can you invite to the event, but before you invite, who can co-create the event and co-create the space with you, and get them involved and create an equal platform for everyone to work together on it. And then just keep it simple. A potluck, anyone can bring food and can share, and just give it room to evolve and see what happens with it.
That's beautiful. Well, I do have a final question for all three of you. I know you've all been involved with the International Potluck for years, and I wanted you to tell me about your favorite event, but we're taking some photos and people are coming up and want us to smile for the camera, so we'll do that. So I really wanted to ask you about that. Can you tell me, you've been involved with this potluck for years. What is your favorite event? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
It's really hard to pick just one. Earlier this year I was going through pictures of each of the events, and so it had been fun to watch kind of the evolution of things and seeing people being involved as participants and also being involved in the planning and watching that grow. If I was to pick one that was my favorite, it was last November for Indigenous Heritage Month. We did one at the Indigenous Association and just the community really showed up for it. And there was an international film festival that was going on in town, and some people from that came over, and there was a group that had a drum circle that was going on well past when the event was supposed to go, and just people from so many different cultures there just kind of gathered around drums and food and watching all the kids from different cultures just kind of running around and playing and just kind of belonging with each other. It was really special. The energy of it was pretty incredible.
That's really fun. It's inspiring
it was,
too. Yeah. How about you, Fauzia? What has been your favorite event?
When we did the festival in downtown, we had Brambur, Somalian Brambur, where people jump so high, and we were afraid the whole stage will come down, Those makes me happy, sharing culture, sharing food, It's a way to break the ice. It's a way to introduce yourself. Food always brings people together.
It does.
And culture. And so the more we continue doing that, we will overcome a lot of other weaknesses, people who are biased and saying immigrants, they don't belong here, all that. We can overcome all those negativity through culture sharing, through food, and we can unite the people through those ideas.
And how about you, Zoe? What has been your favorite event?
They all are so special, but I think last year on World Refugee Day, that was a really great event. It was one of my first international potlucks that I was a part of, and just to see the flags hanging, it was at a park, it was outside, it was a beautiful June day. Flags were hanging from every which way, and people got up and shared their talent. People did poetry, people danced, and just shared their culture along with food and just celebrated the diversity of Fargo-Moorhead area. And that was just really powerful and what made me really excited to be involved with this.
Peter, I'm sure there were some things that you had anticipated when you started this international potluck, but was there anything that surprised you at all during this journey? Anything that made you think, wow, I did not expect that to happen?
I never set out for this to be an ongoing thing. It was, to me, it was just going to be a one-time event. And then so the evolution of that just continued to amaze me. But I can't really nail it down to one specific thing, but you think you've run out of ideas or things that you're going to have an event or come around. And then the next thing you know, you're doing an event at the neighborhood church, and we've got the NDSU barbecue boot camp there with the League of Women Voters doing voting education alongside Maria's Homestyle Mexicans serving up birria tacos. And it all just kind of comes together in just a beautiful way. I thought, I could have never planned something like that to take shape, but yet when you bring the people together and just see what they can kind of add and contribute to it, it just makes something really beautiful and unexpected.
That is beautiful. As I'm sitting up here, I'm reminded of an Anthony Bourdain quote, which he said something along the lines of, if you can't walk in someone else's shoes, at least try their food. And this is sort of, in a way, it's kind of like that,
It's
right?
beautiful, yeah.
Yeah.
very
Well, thank
much.
you all so much. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your stories with us.
Thank you for coming and hosting.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thanks.
It's been so wonderful to learn about the international potluck and all of your stories and your involvement in this community that really seems like it's thriving. You know, you don't think about Fargo-Moorhead area as the place rich in different cultures, but it is, and this is a testament to that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we are going to take a short break to let these folks sit down and bring up our next panel, which is going to feature Concordia students. So feel free to grab some more food or get up and move around, but don't go too far. We'll be right back. If you're just joining us, you're listening to North Star Journey Live on NPR News. I'm reporter Sarah Thamer. We're at Concordia College in Moorhead for the International Food Festival to talk about exactly what's happening here. As Minnesota becomes more diverse, how are communities expanding to welcome newcomers? Few people understand the role of a newcomer as much as international students. These are teenagers who choose to leave their home countries to pursue education elsewhere. The three on stage with me right now are international students here at Concordia, and they have a lot to say about how to intentionally foster inclusion. I'm really excited to learn. So let me introduce them. Siam Shamul grew up in Bangladesh, but as you will hear, he came to the United States as a high schooler in 2019. He's currently a senior at Concordia studying communications and business. And he's also president of the International Student Organization on campus. So glad to have you here, Siam.
Thank you.
Timea Vrabtsova is also a senior here at Concordia. She hails from Slovakia, but has been in the Fargo-Moorhead region for a few years now. She's studying neuroscience. Hi, Timea.
Hello.
And finally, Alicius Togba is here, another Concordia senior. Alicius is from Liberia. She's studying agriculture and business. Welcome, Alicius.
Thank you.
Before we jump into the big picture questions, I'd love for our listeners to get to know each of you. So I wanted to start with you, Siam. Tell us how you ended up in Moorhead, a rural part of Minnesota from your home country of Bangladesh. How did that happen?
Well, it's a long journey to start with, if I say.
It is.
But if I go back in 2019, I moved from Bangladesh, Dhaka, Bangladesh, to New Mexico to pursue high school education in a boarding school called United World College, where students from 90 different countries come together and study for 2 years to learn about each other and just learn about each other's culture and lives.
Wow.
After those 2 years of studying there, I was just looking into my options, where to pursue my higher education and what would be good for me. And Concordia was one of the schools that came across when I was doing my college search. And it felt like the right place for me, I would say. And despite the weather and all the other things that I should not mention here, I do think it's still a very vibrant community,
Sure.
and there's so much you could experience and get to know. And I just love how the Concordia culture is, how students are very connected to each other, professors, to staff, to administration. You feel belonged, you have a sense of community here, and that's the part that brought me here, on top of the scholarship, of course.
Sure, of course. Well, you mentioned that it felt like the right place for you. What made you feel that way?
To start with, I would say there were already some familiar faces that I already knew from my high school that has already enrolled in Concordia. So that was one of the places where I felt comfortable coming here and having a support group already. And on top of that, just Concordia being a small school where students are not getting into classes with 100 other students, but rather in smaller numbers, and you can actually get to know each other and talk and get to know your professor. That's the part that interested me, I would say, because I couldn't imagine myself in a big school where I wouldn't be noticed, or I cannot learn about others that I might be interested in.
There really is something to be said about being in a small, tight-knit community that
Yes.
could really help foster that sense of belonging, right?
Definitely.
Well, to me, I wanted to ask you the same question. What about you? How did you end up at Concordia?
Yeah, my journey as a student in the United States started as an exchange student in Fargo, North Dakota at Oak Grove High School. And that connection was made because the school that I went to in Slovakia was actually started by Lutherans from the Midwest. So I already had those connections. And in 2019, I came to the U.S. as a junior to finish my last 2 years of high school. And since I was already in the Fargo-Moorhead area, building connections throughout that, and especially like being part of a family, since I was with a host family, that really made me feel connected with the community. And yeah, I think I'm going back to like the small campus feeling of like truly feeling like you're not just a number, right? You are part of a community, and people will notice you and check in with you. Yeah, so that was just why I stayed in the Fargo-Moorhead area.
Timea, when you and I were chatting earlier, you made me giggle because I asked you, what was something that shocked you about moving here from Slovakia? What was the biggest change? And you said, well, not much. Tell me a little bit about that. Why did you feel like it wasn't so different?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, the school was started by Lutherans. So I grew up having instructors from Chicago and Minneapolis. So I was used to the lingo, the slang, like the accent. So when I came here, I felt very much at home. So I feel like that's why the culture in that sense was not that shocking to me. It was almost too smooth of a transition for me.
Still looking for that challenge,
Yeah,
huh?
yeah.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Alicia's, how about you? Tell me your story.
My story is a bit similar to Siam. I'm originally from Liberia. When I was 16, I applied for a scholarship to the United World College, and I got accepted to the one in Norway, which is the best one. And from there, while I was there, I got to know a lot of people from over 85 different countries, and it was a great experience. After 2 years, it is kind of part of the contract to have a scholarship in the US, and they have a partnership with 90 different colleges. So I chose Concordia because it had agribusiness, which is something I really wanted to do. Also, before coming, I looked at different restaurants in the Fargo-Moorhead area to see, and they had like around 3 Liberian restaurants. So I was like, sure, that's the place for me. So I came to Concordia partly because of that.
I know when you're in an area that's predominantly white, looking for food that is representative of your culture, it can,
Yeah.
you're picky. You're like,
Very.
is this going to be authentic? So were the 3 Liberian restaurants that you found here, did they live up to your standards?
I think they all had their specialty. Like, one wasn't great at everything, of course, because there are some spices that you just can't find here. And even if it's here, it's not as authentic as the one in Liberia. So they did great for the resources that they had. I would say that.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
that's a nice answer. Well, here in Minnesota, we talk a lot about diversity, but you all are really living it. And so you've been here since you were like 16 years old. That's really young. Talk to me about the strength of diversity. And we'll start with you, Siam. What is the strength of diversity for you?
Well, before I start, I would like to mention that on the side of being the president for International Student Organization, I'm also part of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Commission here on campus. Okay. And being part of it for the last 3 years, I have grown and learned a lot from people. So I think diversity, I don't think you could define it in one sentence because it's different for each person and what you look for. Me living here in the US brought me to the concept of diversity, whereas back home in Bangladesh, I wouldn't think about a topic like that because it is already so diverse and people don't have to put such a topic in a separate light. Whereas coming here, I saw the necessity of putting importance in diversity, in finding those communities, in finding those spaces where you feel that you belong is important, and that's what diversity is to me. And just finding vibrant differences within each other and everyone that you come across during your life activities is what diversity lies within. And here on campus, I would say diversity is is reflected in many ways throughout our different student organizations, through the diverse faculty, the diverse staff, administration, and obviously the students every year that we are growing as a community here. And each person holds unique experiences and unique things to share to each other. That's what makes diversity beautiful here, and that's where I feel like you could really learn what diversity is.
And I also think what's really powerful too, just speaking as an immigrant myself, is you don't necessarily have to find people that come from the same country as you. I think a lot of immigrants just have shared experiences in general, and that's what makes this so beautiful, is you're able to relate to people's experiences. And you don't necessarily have to find someone who's from Bangladesh to understand how difficult it might feel or how lonely it might feel at times. And so to your point, that diversity really does mean something different for everybody.
Yes, I definitely think diversity is the beauty of our similarities and differences, and you just have to look for it.
And how about you, Tamea? I wanted to hear your perspective on, the strength of diversity.
Yeah, I resonated with a lot of what Siam said, especially me coming from Slovakia, a country that is predominantly white. And yeah, the topic of diversity is really not something that people are trying to talk about. So coming to the States and being in spaces with individuals that have different backgrounds, and I'm not just talking about race, I'm talking about like different status, different passions, different careers. I feel like I have been exposed and, in a way, like, challenged to think about diversity very differently, and that continues, that challenges my learning. And I feel like also being part of a campus, I think it's like one of the most diverse places that a lot of people experience, just because we're all here to learn from one another and our professors. And especially I want to say from a place that is coming from a liberal arts perspective, there's an opportunity to really dig deeper than a lot of schools do. So to me it is, and I'll be like mentioning this more, but like diversity is about leaning into discomfort and is leaning into uncertainty. Because if we stay in that comfortable bubble, we're trying to stay with something that we know. And I feel like that's also why one of the big reasons why all three of us chose to come to the States is to be in spaces that are, and with people that are different from us in some shape or form.
Talking about race can be uncomfortable, but it can be so powerful when you lean into that discomfort. What was your experience like when you moved here compared to Slovakia? Do you remember as a child growing up and hearing the word diversity or talking about other cultures, or do you really feel like that started here?
I think the connotation of diversity in Slovakia is very negative. We have minorities, especially the biggest minority are the Roma people, and there's a very negative connotation with the Roma. There's a lot of justification of oppression that continues happening. So I feel like me coming to the States, there's this like true like celebration of diversity, and obviously it's not perfect, right? And that's why we continue trying to be in these spaces and have conversations and sharing stories. But I feel like it is allowing me to maybe sometimes even just poke the bear when I go home to try to have conversations about diversity.
Mm-hmm. And how about you? I wanted to hear a little bit about, how do you view diversity? What are the strengths of diversity? What has your experience been like?
I think diversity is what helps us thrive a lot in life in general. When I hear the word diversity, I don't just think about race. I think about perspective also. We're all very diverse in how we think and what we can contribute to society in general. So I would say I've always been around diversity, not in terms of race, of course, because I'm from a predominantly black country, but we also have different tribes and different ethnic groups within my country. And because we had a civil war, like it was, tribe against tribe and stuff like that. So after the 14 years of civil war, as Liberians, we have all learned to put away tribalism and just all come together and thrive as a nation and as a group of people. So I think just for my country being able to get through that and being born after the war and listening to my grandparents tell me about their story, I think it just motivates me more to learn about diversity and just create a safe space where everyone can thrive and not make people feel excluded because of their race, gender, sexuality, or their ethnic group. So yeah.
When you are an immigrant living in a predominantly white area, or you feel maybe you're somebody's first exposure to what it's like to be from Bangladesh or Liberia, it can often feel stressful, and it can feel like a burden that you're this sort of, people are relying on you to share your story, but in many ways it can be a beautiful thing. So do you feel like you've been able to really educate folks here, and what has that experience been like for you?
I think I definitely have been able to educate people. I am the events planner of the Concordia African Student Association, and one of the main mission of the organization is just to educate people about the African continent, because it is a very big continent and we're very diverse when it comes to culture. So we have mock weddings to show to people how different cultures celebrate that in Africa. We have Taste of Africa, which is like a potluck. We have different foods from different regions. People can try that. And I think just by giving people those experiences, because to go back home right now, the ticket is $2,500. People might not be willing to pay that much to taste the Liberian food, but because we can cook that and have that on campus and just have people try that, it's giving them that experience. And I think a lot of the things when it's experiential, people value it more than when it's just like talking. So I think more action and probably less talking helps people to understand diversity more.
Action over talking.
Yeah.
Good lesson. So, what does belonging look like? How do you know when you're actually part of the community versus just hanging around on the edge? And I'll start with you, Siam. How do you know when you're a part of the community? What is belonging like for you?
I think that goes back to, again, it depends on each individual, because belonging could mean different things to each person. For Alicia's, it could be the food that she was looking into before coming to Fargo-Moorhead. For me, I was looking into like the community vibe, the people, and I'm sure Tamia had something that she was looking into too. And each individual here on this campus or in Fargo-Moorhead that are different looks for that belonging. So for me, I would say definitely the belonging for me here in Fargo-Moorhead was having people that I can talk and I can share my experiences where they can relate and also tell me what's different in their experiences. That's what's belonging to me, where I can have that conversation without thinking that is this person gonna be offended? Is this person gonna be taking things differently, or are they even interested in listening to my story? So having that space in different places with different people, being able to share my story and being able to listen to their stories is empowering, and I think that's what brings my belonging on campus and in Fargo-Moorhead area.
That's really beautiful. How about you, Tamea? What does belonging feel like for you?
Yeah, I think of belonging kind of being this two-way stream where people have to show up and be vulnerable and be excited and curious, but at the same time, it takes a lot of work. It takes consistency, showing up, and I think both parties have to be interested about one another. So like something that I have been noticing, even with me building new pockets of communities around Fargo-Moorhead, is consistently showing up and reaching out to people, checking in, just noticing each other. Like truly belonging is about being seen and being heard. And I feel like if we can provide that for each other, it goes much easier. And yeah, I think it has to be from both sides to truly feel like we all belong.
How do you feel like you've done some of that work here? Give me some examples.
Yeah, I feel like we talked a lot about our involvement on campus. So I want to mention just a few things off campus that I have found some pockets of belonging for myself. For example, I have been going to Fargo Climbing, which is a bouldering gym, and there has been a really wonderful community that is diverse in age and ability and race and sexuality. But at the same time, there are other pockets. There's a skateboarding community that I every now and then tap into, and then I run into people around town, if it is a coffee shop or a restaurant, or just the other day I went to like an outdoor gear sale, and I get there and one of the skateboarding people that I like skateboard with was running it, and I was like, oh hey. So that was just an example of like showing up to things, talking with people, and then later on just seeing them, you know, thriving and doing things that they're passionate about in the community.
Alicia, how about you? Do you feel like you found a sense of belonging here?
Yes, I would say that. And for me, I think something I really appreciate is having conversation, of course, but being an active listener in those conversations. And I would say an example of belonging that I've seen on campus, there are many examples, but just having international professors who speak like me, have an accent like me, like when I get into a classroom, they have different perspective on life like me. I think that makes me feel like I belong. And something else is in the dining services, during the holy month of Ramadan, they have like food for a Muslim in the evening. You can pack your your dinner boxes and take it home with you. After 6 or 7, when you break your fast, you can eat after that. I think that shows that you belong within the Concordia space, because that would be something that's normal for you back home if you were in a predominantly Muslim country, you know? So I think that's something that shows belonging. They care for you, they hear you, they see you, and they're acting towards something that will make you feel comfortable here.
Speaking of belonging really reminds me of my own experience. I'll just share a little bit. So my Palestinian family lived in Kuwait, and that's where I was born before we moved to Minnesota, Ridgefield, Minnesota to be exact, which is where my mom's side of the family lived. And I'll never forget, I truly believe educators have made the biggest impact on my experience here. It was Mrs. Cosgrove in first grade who stayed after class with me and helped me to create a scrapbook of photos of my time in Kuwait, because the first graders in Ridgefield, Minnesota had no idea what Kuwait was, and I didn't expect them to. And so we worked on this scrapbook together, and we had a show and tell, and the kids in the class got to learn a little bit about me, and that was my first memory of what it felt like to belong at such a young age. And I will never forget Mrs. Cosgrove. I hope she's doing okay. I think she has since passed. So but people like her are truly, folks who have made an impact. So I can relate to that. Well, it sounds like international students, by the very nature of what you're doing, are often the first to reach out to find inclusion in their new community. What words of wisdom do you have for folks who are more established in their community? So, for example, and we talked a little bit about this, Tamea, what can a white majority culture, like we have here in Minnesota, what can they do to encourage everyone to belong? Because there is a saying that Minnesotans will invite you everywhere except their home. So what can they do to make it more inclusive and welcoming?
I think for me, if I had to say, I would say belonging is only possible if it's intentional. Because oftentimes you could try to make someone feel belong, but it could turn into a performative act. Whereas if it is intentional, then the other person truly feels it. Sure. So I think the intention of doing things has to be visible, and you have to show that care and actual interest to that other person, and have truly intentions of learning about that other person and what they has to offer, and vice versa. But if it turns out to be just like we're having conversations, then that doesn't do much. For me, it has to be something meaningful, and for that to be meaningful, it has to be intentional for you to actually trying to get to know me.
You don't want to feel like a walking Google page.
Exactly.
I understand that.
It is tiring.
Yes. And how about you, Tamea?
Yeah, I was just thinking about how a lot of times I've heard a lot of international students say that a professor would pretty much put them on the spot to talk about their country, their people. And that feels like a lot of pressure, because the only thing you know is your story and your experience, and maybe people that are extension of you, but it's even hard to speak on behalf of them. So I'm just thinking of, it's really about one-on-one connections. And if we continue having those spaces where people can openly share about themselves, that is going to influence the person that is listening, and later on with their mind and hopefully their heart being changed, the spaces that they're entering, the way they're talking about the people that they have met from different cultures would influence how others think of welcoming people and connecting with people. And that can look in many different ways, yeah.
Alicius, I'd love to hear your perspective on that. What can people do to encourage a more welcoming environment?
I think I would just say be open-minded to the experiences that international students or people from different countries bring, because if you're open-minded, then you're able to absorb information. Instead, if you pretend like you already know what that person's experience is gonna be just because they're from a least developing country, then you're not fully giving yourself the opportunity to get to know them. Instead, you just have preconceived notions of their story. Just staying curious, like Tamea always says, and being open-minded about different possibilities and experiences.
I love that. You know what, NPR News, we do like to stay curious and stay connected, which is sort of the theme here. Well, I really wish we had more time. I learned so much from all of you. Thank you so much for being willing to come up here and share your stories with everybody. It's not always an easy thing to do, but you did it so well, and I learned so much. So thank you. Well, since we are at a potluck, I do want you to tell me the food that you miss most from your country, and this could be like really quick. So we'll start with you.
I think that's a very easy answer. I come from Bangladesh. We love fish, and one of my favorite things to eat is the hilsha fish, which is the national fish of Bangladesh.
Okay, and Timea?
I miss my grandma's sviechkova, which it's this like steamed loaf of like dumpling, and it's made with like freshly, or if you have frozen vegetables, usually gathered from our garden, and they're mixed with a lot of butter and milk, and then usually a meat of the choice that my grandma picks.
It sounds delicious. I love a dumpling. I feel like every culture has some kind of a dumpling. And how about you, Alicia?
I would say the food I miss the most is cassava gravy. We have cassava, plantain, edibles. We boil a lot of it, and then we make like a sauce on the side with fish, chicken. Because in Liberia, we mix our proteins a lot in one dish. So we just have the best food. Yeah, it's good.
My mouth is watering now. I'm really excited to eat after this. This has been so fantastic. Once again, that was Siam Shamul, Timea Vrapsova, and Alicius Togba, all international students studying here at Concordia College. Thank you so, so much for sharing your experiences and your stories with us. We really appreciate it. And I also just want to give a shout out to our wonderful team at NPR News, Tom Campbell, Josh Savageau, and Kelly Gordon, and Concordia University for having us here too. So that wraps up our North Star Journey live from Moorhead. Be well, everyone. Be safe, and happy holidays. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
you.
Sarah.
Thank you.